obsessed with the whole world. Great that Kate Golden releases a spin-off. Love. I don't even want to talk about it more. I will never do this again. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another day of bookmas, and if you guys can tell from the title below, I am doing my October and November wrap-up today. We have a lot of books, so grab a drink, grab a snack, maybe crochet or knit if you want to, because this is probably going to be a long video. We have 20 plus books to talk about. I don't usually combine like 2 months into one wrap-up, but October was super busy. I didn't read a lot as well, and so I figured that I would just combine it with November. But now I think about it, I am quite overwhelmed by the amount of books I have to talk about, and also I feel like I'm the type of person where when I read a book, I'll forget what happens maybe in like 2 weeks. So right now I feel very overwhelmed with the fact that I have to remember and like dig deep into my brain to figure out what I thought about the book I read in October, because October feels so long for me. I'm a little bit overwhelmed, but I'm gonna try my best. That being said, let us just get started with our October books. I read 7 books in October. Not a whole lot because I went traveling like the last 2 weeks of October. I was in a semi-slump, so I wasn't in the mood to pick up a lot of books. I'm talking about the book of Azrael. A lot of the books that I read in the month of October is going to be linked in the description box. I do highly recommend watching the reading vlogs of these books because they're a lot more in-depth. So this book is the first book of the Gods and Monsters series. This is by Amber V. Nicole. Diana has made a deal with Caden, who is a monster in this world. He's basically the highest of monsters in the hierarchy, and Diana made a deal to save her little sister. She is forever in servitude to this guy, and he really wants to find this book of Azrael, which so happens to be in possession with this guy called Liam. Samkiel, aka Liam, because he changed his name for some reason. Samkiel is the world ender. He is a very powerful god. Not a monster, but a god. Diana goes to Samkiel and they end up having an enemies to lovers relationship. This book was a little bit confusing in a sense where I don't know if it was urban fantasy or if it was high fantasy, because some parts of this felt like it was high fantasy, but some other parts felt like it was in the modern world urban fantasy where like cars, technology, airplanes exist. I was quite confused with the world building. It was like all over the place in my opinion, but the first half of this book I remembered I really enjoyed. I thought the enemies to lovers was really interesting because Diana obviously needs to kill Samkiel and Samkiel needs to kill Diana, but then they end up falling in love, and you know they're gonna fall in love, so that whole pining situation was really good. But then as soon as they got together, I don't know what happened, but the book got boring. It was really predictable, and it felt like the both of them didn't have anything other than the romance they had together. I rated this book 3 stars. I have my reading journal next to me, by the way, so that I will not forget. Also, something else about this book is that I don't remember anything about the side characters. They were very forgettable. So yeah, it was a 3-star book. I'm gonna continue the series. I do want to know what's gonna happen next. I do like the writing. I hope things get better from here. I have the Vows by Jessica Joyce next. This is also part of the same reading vlog with the book of Azrael, and this is a second chance romance by Jessica Joyce. She wrote You With a View. This is her debut novel. This is her second book written, and I didn't really enjoy You With a View. When I went into this book, I didn't have high expectations. This is a second chance romance, which I love. That trope, it's my favorite trope of all time. But then, oh my gosh, this book completely surprised me. I think I read 20 pages and then I realized I needed to tab the book. So I have tabs in my book because I was obsessed with this book. This is my 5-star read of October. It's the only one I think of this video because I actually didn't have a lot of 5-star reads, but this book really resembled Happy Place and The Summer Will Be Different for me, and I just really liked the whole aspect of friendship in this book. Oh, by the way, the plot of the book I forgot to explain. Our main character is Georgia. I was correct. The main character's name is Georgia, and Georgia and Eli were dating and they broke up. 5 years later, they have to technically like meet again because their mutual best friends are getting married, and they need to help plan the wedding because the wedding is in shambles. A lot of things are going wrong. They end up falling in love again. There was a lot of beautiful friendships between Eli, our main character, Georgia, and the friend is getting married, and it was so beautiful to see that. Georgia also really hit home for me because she was a character that really resembled me as a person, but then she was aware of them and she knows that she has them, but she's not able to push through from that, and it felt really real for me. A lot of the times when she doesn't want to talk about something because she's scared of ruining the dynamic or ruining the friendship, I feel so deeply with her. This book really hit home. It made me cry. A lot of the part of this book was just so emotional for me, so I Absolutely love this book. The romance was amazing. There was so much tension and pining from Eli's side. Eli was a great male main character to me. He was very quiet, but he showed a lot of the things that he loved about Georgia, and the way he treated Georgia, the way he still loved her all this time, the way he still pined for her was so sweet, and I loved their relationship together. The reasoning as to why they broke up 5 years ago, I also felt like made a lot of sense as a couple who have dated for a very long time. I also think that the reason why they ended up wanting to get back together also made sense, because I feel like second chance romances, they can go bad when you feel like the way they broke up and the way they're gonna get back together is very atrocious. Before this book, everything made sense to me, at least in my opinion, and I absolutely loved Georgia. Georgia was my favorite character in this book because of how much she really resembled me as a person. 5-star read for me. I will read anything Jessica Joyce writes now. I feel like she improved so much from You With a View. I think I read this book in that same reading vlog, or was it another reading vlog? I think it might be another reading vlog. But I read Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli, which is a romantasy about a witch and a witch hunter. Rune is our female main character and she is a witch. Gideon is our male main character and he's a witch hunter. And Rune is secretly known as the Crimson Moth. She saves other witches and helps them escape, because in this world witches are condemned, and Rune is secretly pretending to be a regular person in society. And you're set in a fantasy world, but then it's like semi Bridgerton vibes, and I really liked the setting of this book. I felt like overall the storyline flowed really well, plotting was great, pacing was really fast, and everything happened so quickly. I think I read this really quickly as well. It was instant attraction, but they didn't really act upon their feelings until like almost at the end of the book. So I did like that there was a little bit of slow burn involved. However, I don't enjoy Rune as our female protagonist because she didn't feel like she had depth in her. I felt like Gideon had a lot more going with him, with his backstory and why he became witch hunter and what he's doing right now. But with Rune, it didn't feel like she had a meaning to what she's doing. It just didn't feel like she was strong enough to be the Crimson Moth, to be honest. So Rune as a character for me was kind of a letdown, but I loved the plot of this book. The setting and the romance between the two of them were great. So I ended up rating this book 4.5. The ending of this book completely saved this book. The ending was a roller coaster ride. It was so good. There was a lot of things going on, plot twists, plot reveals. I did guess one, but everything else was just so good, and I felt like it gave a great leeway to the second book, which is coming out next year. So I did enjoy this, and I will be reading the next book, and I feel like the writing is great too. So Heartless Hunter was a 4.5-star read. Read A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden next. However, I think I'm going to talk about this book as a whole trilogy because I did read the second and the third book in the month of November, so I will be combining it a little bit. I read A Dawn of Onyx in the month of October, and then I read A Promise of Peridot in the month of November, as well as the last book, A Reign of Rose. But I do not have A Reign of Rose in physical copy. I did buy on my Kindle because I was just obsessed with the whole world that I really wanted to read the last book. This is the first book of the Sacred Stones trilogy. This is a romantasy, and you're following Arwen, who lives in the Amber Kingdom. There are 8 kingdoms in this book, I think, and they're all by like the names of gems. This is the map, by the way. Is it 9 or is it 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, it's 9. And Arwen lives in the Amber Kingdom, and currently Amber and Onyx are in a war. They're fighting. Arwen is a very gifted healer. Her brother's also in the army fighting against Onyx Kingdom, and one day he comes back, something happens, and they have to escape. Arwen then gets captured, and she goes over to the Onyx Kingdom, and she meets a prisoner who ends up helping her go through this whole ordeal. That is a very small part of A Dawn of Onyx. There are so many things going on in this book, as well as this book, that you just have to read on to figure it out. A Dawn of Onyx I rated 3.5 stars, and A Promise of Peridot I rated 4.5, and then A Reign of Rose was a 4-star read for me. This whole trilogy is a 4-star trilogy overall. For A Dawn of Onyx, what I didn't like about this was that I felt like Arwen and Cain, our main characters, they didn't have a lot of depth in them. There wasn't a lot of character in them. Arwen felt very gullible and naive. I just felt like there was a lot of focus on the romance between Arwen and Cain, that it felt like they were not focusing on them as individuals. Cain was very mysterious, but you don't really get to see a lot of his backstory in this book, and so he felt a little bit boring because it felt like he was just in love with Arwen all the time. The side characters didn't really play a huge role in this book, so I didn't feel like a very all-rounded romantasy book, but I felt like it was a great start to a new series. And then you go on to A Promise of Peridot, and oh my gosh, things happen in here. Things really happen in here. I felt like this book didn't have that middle book syndrome. It was so good. There was a lot of action, a lot of character growth in this book, I felt, and the romance grew so much. There was a lot of tension and pining involved in this book. Cain became my favorite character by A Promise of Peridot because he was so obsessed, but he had a very big role in this whole war, and he was so conflicted, but I loved seeing those emotions in him. I felt like he was so real. I think the reason why I wasn't a 5-star read was because of the ending. I felt like it was a little bit of a letdown, a bit of a cop-out. It was a cliffhanger ending, but it felt like a very big cop-out, to be honest. Overall, it was a great second book. And then we go on to A Reign of Rose, which is the last book. That book basically follows the whole storyline, and there were a lot of plot holes that were resolved in that book, and I felt like the romance was also resolved in that book. But I think because in A Reign of Rose they're technically already together, it didn't feel like there was a lot of romance in the last book. Also, it felt like everything was tell and no show. There were a lot of instances where things happened, but they didn't really tell you why it happened. Everything felt like coincidences or like luck that happened. So to me, I think I would have preferred if there were a lot more POVs in this book, because there were a lot of characters that came out in that book, and I really want to see a spin-off on some of these characters. I am gonna pray that Kate Golden releases a spin-off. There were a lot of loose ends when it comes to those characters' backstories and how they're gonna go about the character. So I feel like there's gonna be more spin-offs in this world, but overall a 4-star read because I felt like it was just great. I felt like the world building and the fantasy world was great, but I think the execution of the characters and how we went to the end of the book, it felt like everything was so easy. Overall, it was a 4-star read, but this whole series I do highly recommend. I am so glad I picked it up. Be right back because apparently I'm running out of batteries. Okay, I changed the batteries. I am back. Next up, I have Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. This is technically a reread because I did pick up the indie published version of this book, I think in the beginning of this year, and then it got picked up. The indie one is, I think, somewhere here. Anyway, I wanted to pick this up again because I saw on Instagram that the author said there was a lot of editing that had to be done in this book, so I wanted to see if there was a lot of changes. And let me tell you, there was a lot of changes. In this book, you're following Elowyn. She is the main protagonist. She is the princess of the Emirath Kingdom, and when she was young, she got soul bonded to 5 dragons. However, her dad didn't want her to have that much power, and so he locked her up in a castle, completely locked up. A few years later, she escaped. She got out. She ended up living up north, and then she made her own like little kingdom. But then she always dreamt of her dragons, who is still locked up in the Emirath castle, and she wants to get her revenge. So she ends up working with the commander of Veribath called Caden to steal back her dragons, but also to literally take over Emirath because Caden wants to take over Emirath. I rated this book 3.75. The original rating I had for the indie version was actually a 4, but I think if I think back, I would have rated like a 3 because in the original indie version, it was so bad writing wise. Like, I think the plot was great, and I think there could have been more done with the world building, but overall, as a whole, it was not bad. There were a lot of grammatical errors, a lot of weird sentence structuring, and from chapter to chapter, it felt a little bit awkward. So I went into this kind of wishing there was more editing, and yes, there was a lot of things cut out from the book because the indie version was a lot of information that was unnecessary. So this book was a lot easier to read. And then I hit the halfway mark and I realized that from paragraph to paragraph, there was this problem where things felt cut out. Things felt like it was jumping from A to B and there was no flow whatsoever. And I think it's because a lot of the information was cut out from this book that the paragraphs don't feel like they flow together. Overall, I did really like the romance. I like the storyline. It wasn't cringy, the pacing was great, and I felt like even though the world building lacked a little bit, there was a lot of things that I felt like could have been explained a little bit better. That was my main issue with Fear the Flame. So the reading experience kind of felt a little bit weird by the end of it. But I rated it at 3.75. I'm gonna pick up the second book. Obviously, I don't know when it's gonna be released, but the back of the book says that the second book is called Wrath of the Dragons, and I'm excited. So that is Fear the Flames. I read Between Us by Vari McFarlane next. This is a lit fic woman's fiction romance book, I would say, and in this book you're following Roisin. She is dating Joe. Roisin and Joe have been dating for like 10 years. They are in the same friend group of 6 people, and Joe is a screenwriter, director, producer. I don't actually know what he is. I think he's a producer. He is releasing his new upcoming crime TV show series, and they end up going on a trip together to celebrate this, and they had a watch party for the first episode of this crime series, and Roisin watches it and realized that a lot of the things in that show really resembles a lot of the things that happened to her personally, and then she realized that Joe is not exactly who he seems to be. I think the main issue I had with this book was that the plot moved really slowly. By the 20% mark, they were still talking about like the relationship and that Roisin has been feeling like Joe has been distant in the relationship. It felt like Roisin was a pushover to the things that happened to her in this book because she has a very annoying mom, and especially Joe as a boyfriend and an ex-boyfriend was really annoying. It felt like she was just brushing things off for no reason except for the fact that she doesn't want to deal with it. Lastly, the romance line was very forced and very weird. There was no chemistry whatsoever. Things that happened with the romance with the guy was so weird because I didn't see it coming, and there was no like inkling as to why the guy even liked her. Yeah, I rated this 2 stars. I think I gave it a better rating because I did like the conversation that Roisin had with her love interest like in the middle of the book. That was the most interesting part of the book, to be honest. Like 70 to 80% was great. Last book I read in October is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I loved House in the Cerulean Sea, so I picked this up. It did not disappoint. TJ Klune's like writing flair really appeared in this book, so I did enjoy this. You are following our main protagonist, Wallace, and he dies in a freak accident, but he doesn't want to be dead. He doesn't accept that he's dead. He is sent to this tea house who is owned by a person called Hugo, and Hugo basically helps Wallace pass into the afterlife. I like the writing in this book. I love the found family that you get in this book, and I did see a lot of growth in Wallace's character, but I didn't like Wallace originally, so it wasn't enjoyable because Wallace was not a very good person. He was very irritating in the beginning. He did end up becoming a better person, but I think that there was a lot that he needed to do in order to kind of redeem himself in a sense. So Wallace was not an enjoyable character to me, but I did love Hugo. I loved the other characters in this book. I did not like the romance, so that's why this book ended up being 4 stars. I think I would prefer it if there was no romance. Like, I think it was really forced. Wallace and Hugo had a romance going on, by the way, and I just didn't feel like it was necessary. But I still love TJ Klune. I think I'm gonna pick up more of his books. This is really good. Now let us get on with my November books. Currently, while I'm filming this, I've read 12 books, but I'm anticipating to read 13 this month. I'll explain it as we go. In the month of November, a lot of these books I don't have reading vlogs on, so I'm gonna try and explain it as best as I can. First up, I read Leather and Lark by Bryn Weaver. This is the second book following Butcher and Blackbird in the Ruinous Love trilogy, and in this book you're following Lachlan Kane, who is the oldest brother, I think. Lark is the best friend of Sloane, who is the female main character in the first book. Basically, Lachlan and Lark is a marriage of convenience because of certain situations that involves Lachlan's job and Lark's family. That's all you need to know. It's a romance between the 2 of them. This is kind of gory, a lot of killing involved, but this book was surprisingly not as gory as the first book. However, the romance was not my favorite. I did not like the romance in this book. It felt like Lachlan and Lark had an insta-love type of situation. The whole situation of them going from hating to being friends to being in love The flow was really bad. I didn't have an enjoyable time. The romance was cringy. The spice was cringy. I rated it 2 stars because I did like the characters of Sloane and Rowan that appeared in this book, but also I think that they had a very wholesome like found family situation. I had to take a break because I was getting tired talking about these books. Next book I read is The Game Changer by Alana Ferguson. This is her new release and this is a hockey romance. This is about Ian Chase and Delilah Baker. So Ian was in a hockey team and he ends up having to leave because he had a scandal going on, and then 6 years later he comes back to that same hockey team. It's a PR nightmare because his scandal is coming back in full force and they need to figure out how to stray away from that scandal so that he can play properly in the new season. And then comes in Delilah Baker, who is a sweetheart of the town they're living in. She is a part of this cooking show and her brother is a part of the hockey team that Ian is in as well. Something happened and then they end up having to fake date because of that. The fake dating aspect was not really big in this book. They pretended to be dating, but they were not telling the press that they were actually dating. At first, it was cute. I love a fake dating romance, so I was into it. But then I realized that the whole obsession of Delilah and Ian was a little bit weird. Ian and her brother were good friends and they were really good friends since high school. They played together when they were in high school and Delilah always had a crush on Ian. So the whole situation of them being in a relationship was very weird because Delilah constantly talks about how much she liked him when she was young and how she finally got him now. That was the issue I had. And also it felt like Delilah and Ian had nothing going on other than the fact that they were in a relationship and they liked each other. In Ian's part, it was weird that suddenly all he can think about is that Delilah has really good assets. In that sense, it felt everything was very lusty, but then the spice was great. Like, Lana Ferguson always writes great spice. I loved Jack, who is the brother. I loved him. He had a lot of very witty and funny comments about the relationship, and he was also not hating on the both of them dating. It was very cute. It was very fast. It was very easy. Just what I wanted during the time. So I rated this at 3.5 because it was great. I just felt like it was a bit weird when it comes to Lila's obsession with Ian. I then read another sports romance. I read Wicked Serve by Grace Riley. This is a part of the whole sports romance series she's writing. I forgot what it's called, but there are 3 books previous to this one, and this is the last book of that series. It's about Izzy and Nikolai. I remember that. Izzy is the only daughter of the 3 brothers who have their own books, by the way, and I think they're like somewhere here. Izzy and Nikolai had a fling, a summer fling, and then when they go back to school, they go their separate ways. But then something happens in Nikolai's hockey team, and so he ends up transferring to Izzy's school. The kick is that Nikolai is her brother's big enemy. Her brother doesn't like Nikolai as a hockey player, and that's the whole romance. It was really spicy from the get-go. The romance started from the get-go, but for some reason in this book it didn't feel boring. With romance books, when they start the romance too quickly, it felt boring, but with this one it didn't feel boring, and because they had history, I could understand where their attraction came from. So for a while there was a little bit of pining, and then they got together and it wasn't boring. It was a lot of Nikolai and Izzy trying to find each other, trying to figure out their relationship. I thought it was quite wholesome, their relationship. Only Nikolai understood Izzy and only Izzy liked Nikolai in a sense because the whole hockey team really liked Nikolai. It was a very sweet book. It was really cute. I rated this 4 stars. I loved the found family in this book. I loved that there was a lot of scenes with her and her brothers. Nikolai didn't really have a good family background, so seeing him with Izzy and the brothers girlfriends was really sweet. I did enjoy my reading experience, especially because this is the last book, so I felt like everything closed off really well, and I did really like Nikolai as a character. I do recommend the series. The first book, which is First Down, was not my favorite, but everything else other than that was great. The next few books are on reading vlogs, so I'm gonna just lightly talk about them. Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mirror. This is the second book following Assistant to the Villain. In the first book, you're basically following Evie as she becomes the assistant to the villain, and I didn't like this book. I felt like Evie was a very different character than who she was in the first book, and an Assistant to the Villain is a fantasy book, but it felt like a very hee ha ha fun time type of fantasy book. It was very comedic. It was not serious, but in this book they try to be serious and also comedic, so I didn't know which line they were in. It was very gray, that whole area. I rated this book 3 stars, but I think in hindsight I would rate it a 2.5 because I don't even remember what happened in this book. I did love the frog in this book. The frog is the winner of this book. And also his backstory is also really like sad. I did love Tristan. Tristan was my favorite character in this book. He's the main character, by the way. He's the villain's name, and I felt like he had a lot of depth in him, and the way he grew in this book was really sweet. Evie was all over the place. Evie just didn't know what she wanted. The last book is coming out next year. I probably will pick it up, but this was just, it left a very bad feeling in my mouth. I read The Enemy by Sarah Adams next, and this is just a very lighthearted, fun, and easy rom-com. You're following June. I was close. You're following June, who is a baker, and she has a donut shop in the town that she's living in, and Ryan is a hotshot chef. They both went to high school before. June had a crush on Ryan, but then Ryan rejected her in high school. A few years later, June's best friend's getting married, and Ryan is the best man of the wedding, and they end up meeting again, and June really wants to show Ryan what he has been missing all his life. She still holds a grudge on Ryan rejecting her in high school, and this has been a long time, by the way. It's been like years, like 10 plus years of this happening. It felt weird that June had such a big grudge, such a big hatred on Ryan for something that happened so long ago. But then second of all, the other weird thing is that Ryan has always had a crush on June. It's been 10 plus years. The romance, it was cute. I love Sarah Adams' writing. I think overall she writes romances really great. The plot flowed well. I felt like both June and Ryan had backstories to them that meant a lot. But I think overall, I couldn't really understand June's hatred towards Ryan. And I rated it 3 stars because I didn't like the first half of the book. I enjoyed the second half of the book. That is The Enemy by Sarah Adams. And then I think the last book I read in that vlog was Where the Dog Stands Still by A.B. Pornick. I missed one Kindle book. I'm going to talk about it after this one, but I read Where the Dog Stands Still by A.B. Pornick. This is a YA fantasy standalone book, and this is A.B. Pornick's debut novel. In this book, you're following Liska. Liska lives in this village, and she has powers. And in this book, when you have powers, when you have magic, you are shunned upon, you are hated, you're said to be a demon, a devil, you're very bad. And Liska accidentally unleashes her powers because of some reason, and she really wants to get rid of her magic so that she's not an outcast in her village. And then she goes into the woods, the Driada that surrounds her village, to find this thing called the fern flower in order to grant her a wish of that she doesn't want her magic in her anymore. She ends up meeting the Leshy, who then gives her a bargain. He will grant her her wish of losing her magic if she is in servitude to him for a year. I love this book. I think the atmosphere and the vibe, gothicness of it, the eeriness of the woods and the manor they were living in was done so freaking well. As a standalone book, everything was explained super well. Even the magic was explained really well. So I was honestly really surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. And I loved the romance between Liska and the Leshy, even though it was a little bit weird for a while because the Leshy was 700 years old. But I did like how this book ended. I thought it was the most realistic and it was really good. And if you guys want to find a book that resembles House Moving Castle, you want to find a book that resembles Sorcery of Thorns with a sentient manner that moves, that listens, that can feel emotions. You have a few other side characters in this whole manner that plays a huge role in Liska and Leshy's life, and I rated this 4.5. I'm gonna pick up A.B. Pornick's next release next year, so I'm excited for that. Let me talk about my Kindle book for a bit because I forgot about that book. I read Rabid by Raven Kennedy and Ivy Asher. This was just a random Kindle Unlimited read. I wanted to read an Omegaverse book, and on TikTok a lot of people say it was really good. I rated this book 3 stars as well. I think overall I did like how the story went on, and the female protagonist was really strong. I forgot to explain what this book is. I don't even know how to explain this book. Essentially, the female protagonist of this book was supposed to shift, and then she ends up going rabid because her shift went wrong. She was supposed to be essayed by another wolf, and then she gets caught and she is thrown to another pack that is said to be very dangerous, very violent, but then she ends up mating to the alpha of that pack. In the beginning, it was just really slow. The plot didn't move at all. When it hit 30 to 40% was when the female protagonist finally was dropped off to the new pack. I suggest checking trigger warnings for this book because it was really heavy in my opinion, and so the reading experience was kind of difficult. She's very strong-willed. Even though lots of bad things are happening to her, she still wants to put up a fight. So I did like by the end how things happened, because the MMC was also the type that was controlling, but then he allows her to kind of find herself. A lot of things happened to her FMC. She had a lot of trauma. I rated it 3 stars. I don't know how to feel about it, not gonna lie, but it was decent. Like, I would recommend it if you want an Omegaverse book, but it's very heavy. That's Rabid. I have two romantasy books that were a part of the same reading vlog with A Promise of Peridot. It's also my romantasy reading vlog. The first one I have is Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. In this book, you're following Ophelia, who is a necromancer, and her mom recently passed away, and so she has to take over the magic of her mom's legacy, her family legacy. Unfortunately, her mom left her a lot of debt and loan, and her family manor is to be taken away by the city, and so she has to pay off her debt. Genevieve, who is her little sister, somehow figures out that they have loans, and she enters Phantasma, which is basically a game, a devil's game, where you go through 9 levels, and I don't know if it's like based on the 9 princes of hell or what, but you go through 9 levels, and if you win, you can grant yourself a wish. Ophelia then goes to Phantasma to find her little sister, and she enters the game, and then she meets a guy who ends up helping her in the game to figure out how to win and how to get her sister back. First off, the book was really fast-paced, and I don't remember being bored by the book at all, even though it was like 500 pages. It definitely resembled Caraval slash like Throne of the Fallen with a lot of like the demons and devils, but Caraval because it follows 2 sisters. One sister goes into a game, and the other sister wants to like find her little sister. But I think what I had a problem with was that I didn't like Ophelia as a character. I thought she was really weak and naive, and she really needed help. There were a lot of contestants in this game, but I felt like every single one of those other contestants didn't really have any help, while Ophelia had this other person who was helping her in the game, and he's our MMC, by the way. His name is Blackwell, and I did love Blackwell's character. He was so mysterious. He was great in the story. He helped Ophelia a lot. In that sense, I felt like Ophelia just needed too much help when even other people didn't need help. I did enjoy the romance, although it felt a little bit insta-love because Blackwell and Ophelia, they only met and they immediately like were obsessed with each other. And I don't know where that came from, to be honest, but I do have to admit the spice was great. After that whole insta-love situation, the romance was really cute, and I did like seeing Genevieve and Ophelia together. And I have to admit, the story flowed so quickly, and I was reading it so quickly, and I wasn't bored at all by the storyline, and I really want to pick up the second book, and I did like the ending. So this ended up being a 3.5 stars. I think I would like the second book more because the second book is about Genevieve that's coming out next year, and I like Genevieve's character in this book. Yeah, that's Phantasma. The other book I read in that reading vlog is A Promise of Peridot, where I talked about it, and then the last one is Faebound by Sarah L. Arifi. I don't want to talk too much about this book because I actually didn't like this book. This was my first and ever 1-star read. As for the storyline, you're following Iren. She is the commander of the elven army, and right now they're currently in war. The elves are in war with each other, and there are humans, there are fae, there are elves, but the humans and the fae are told to be extinct. Something happens that ends up with her being exiled into the barren Fae lands. She has a little sister called Lettel who is training to be a diviner, and Lettel goes to find Iren alongside the captain of the army, who is like right below Iren in hierarchy, and he also goes to find Iren in this barren Fae lands. They end up finding that Fae actually exists, and things happen there. Why I didn't like this book: 1, there was lots of animal abuse, and I don't enjoy that. The animals play a big role in this book. Animals play a huge role in this book. The showing of the animal abuse, I did not enjoy. Second, Iren was very boring and very flat. A lot of things happened to her, but there was no emotions involved in the things that happened. For example, she accidentally killed something, but there was no remorse, there was no guilt. Third, Lettel was really annoying and irritating, wreaking havoc all over the place and wanting attention every single time. Fourth of all, the romance was all insta-love. Lettel has a romance line, Iren has a romance line, and every single one of them are insta-love. Lastly, the plot was really predictable. The world building and the fantasy magic system was not done well. It didn't make any sense. A lot of the politics that occurred in this book didn't make any sense. There were some items that were important to the elven army that was supposed to be scarce was really abundant in the Faelands, but what for? Faebound was my 1-star read that I don't even want to talk about it more. Last book. I promise. A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This is a dark academia fantasy book. You can read it as a standalone, but I know there's a second book coming out next year, A Theory of Something. And in this book, you're following Effie. Effie is a student in the architectural college that she's in. However, she wants to apply to the literature college, but then they're living in a fantasy world, but it's technically semi-50-60 society where it's a lot of sexism, so females are not allowed to enter the literature college. college because it's the most popular one, and so only males are allowed to enter. And originally the architectural college was not allowed as well, but then because Effie has really good grades, they allowed her, and so she's the only female in that college. But she doesn't like it. She wants to be a literature student. She loves reading books. She has a favorite author called Emrys Meridian who wrote this book called Angarad. Emrys Meridian passed away very recently, and his son and his wife wants to rebuild the manor they were living in. They end up asking Effie for help. Effie then goes on to this manor and meets Preston, who is a student in the literature college, and Preston is doing an article on Emrys Meridian of how that he might be a fraud, that he might not have written Angarad, and they discover very dark secrets from there in that manor. I was surprised by how scared I was reading this book at night. I thought the relationship between Effie and Preston, the romance, was pretty cute, but I think I would have preferred if there was no romance because I didn't really see it coming to begin with. What I really liked about this book was definitely the setting, the plotting, the mystery behind the manor, the mystery behind the son and the mom. There was a lot of things going on. Even the action was really good. Overall, I did like the plot, but I didn't like the romance. I'm gonna rate this a 3.5 stars. I'm excited to pick up the second book of this because the ending kind of left it in a sense where things can happen, but you don't really need to read the second book. I think, however, I will be reading the second book. I love the setting of this world. It was just really creepy and eerie. Even though I was scared, I think I liked it. So yeah, that's A Study in Drowning, and I'm gonna rate it 3.5. Technically, we're not at the end of November, so there is one book I might be able to read before November ends. However, I have no time to film this wrap up, so that's why I'm filming it now. I will insert a clip of myself talking about that book if I end up reading it. I'll give you guys a hint. This is the book. I suddenly don't really know how I feel about the book. I do love the world building. I do love the fantasy world we're in, and I do really like both characters, both main protagonists, Khan and Rave, but I feel like the ending was not fulfilling for me, at least. Also, I felt like the plot went to a direction that I predicted. However, it felt like in this book the characters were not really well fleshed out in terms of their backstories yet, so maybe there is a lot more going on with the series that I need to continue reading to figure out. I don't know how to explain it, but the ending just felt very abrupt. There wasn't really like a climactic part of the book, to be honest. There were little bits and pieces of like hints, I guess you would say, to what's gonna happen in the second book. I think I'm gonna rate When the Moon Hatched. I don't know. I'm like sitting on a 4 stars just because I love the storyline, and I did really like the romance, by the way. Khan and Rave, you have to read it to understand, but it was very explosive and in a way that was just so painful but also so beautiful. And I did love seeing the way they got together, the slow burn. Well, they're not technically together. Also, I don't like the fact that we get a POV of the bad guy. I would have loved to see the POV of the main characters instead. That's The When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, and I am officially done with this book. That is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. I know it was a long video. I am tired, you guys. I'm thirsty. I need to eat. I need to drink. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you guys enjoyed watching me and listening to me talk about these books. I will never do this again. I will probably just do each month's wrap up on its own because this is so much book to talk about in one go. Don't forget to look out for my other videos in Bookmas, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!